There is surely nothing other than the single purpose of the present moment. A man's whole life is a succession of moment after moment. If one fully understands the present moment, there will be nothing else to do and nothing else to pursue.
Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. And today, part 2 of the review of this absolutely marvelous Grand Seiko spring drive. Of course, this is the SBGA387, part of a trinity of Grand Seikos released for 2018, and very special occasion, and so special in fact we I say we as if it's me and the watch, but I decided to split the video into 2 parts. So have a look back at part 1. I'll leave a link in that corner up there somewhere, and there'll be a link in the description, because I really do feel to fully comprehend how significant this watch is, we really had to discuss its history in a little bit more detail than usual. Usually I just put the history in the watch reviews, one part, and also to commemorate the occasion that this watch is the first USA only release, the Trinity that is. There are 2 other watches, one in platinum, one in rose gold, with different colored dials, all with what's called this Kira-zuri technique, which we'll discuss in just a moment. So we have the stainless steel version. It's the most affordable out of the 3. Now, before I completely forget, I'll do a quick wristwatch check. There we go. I'm wearing my Stover, which I unboxed not so long ago. I'm dying to review this piece. I will do soon. Beautiful blued hands, and because of those blued hands, I've matched it with a lizard blue strap as well. Absolutely gorgeous, manual wind, ETA in there. But yeah, have a look at the unboxing and stay tuned for the full review. Let's take it back to Japan. I must state that it did come on the bracelet, which I have here. It's a double push button clasp, absolutely exquisitely made. So yeah, I didn't want to scuff it up, so I've put it on this wonderful Hirsch strap, which I bought from Holben's. Really nice, kind of, I'm not sure if you can see that. Come on, focus. There we go, water resistant. Crocker grain there, just to play off the blue color schemes we've got going on. Now, immediately you'll notice this stunning blue dial, and it will change colors dramatically in different light as I move it, all different kind of textures, and of course that thermally blued seconds hand. So a lot of blues going on here, and it's definitely my favorite out of the 3 releases, although I must confess I haven't seen the other 2 in the flesh yet, so maybe I'll probably eat my words, but I'll reserve judgment for those later on. So the entire case is stainless steel. We have the famous Zaruzatsu polishing, which is very particular. It's not immediately noticeable in comparison to, you know, a high polish by the Swiss or Germans or whoever, but it does have a slightly different luster to it. The sharpness of the edges is insanely precise. The contrast there from that brushed surface to the high polished finish there, these wonderful angles here, very distinctive lugs on this particular piece. This is inspired by the 44 GS case, which was a milestone Grand Seiko from, I think, from 1967. I might be wrong, but have a look back in part 1. The bezel is a high polish as well. We have a very subtly domed sapphire crystal, anti-reflective coating on the inside. It's a dual curved sapphire, and of course a sapphire crystal on the back for the display back of that wonderful spring drive movement, but we'll come back to that. So let's get the dimensions out of the way first. It's exactly 40 millimeters in diameter. We have a height of 12.6 millimeters. From the very extremities of lug to lug, we're looking at 46 millimeters, and we have a lug width of 19 millimeters. Of contemporary size, but not overly gigantic. The crown is wonderfully signed with the Gothic style GS logo there, with a bead blasted finish to contrast. It is a screw down crown, and we have a water resistance of 100 meters. Interestingly, we have drilled lug holes, which I didn't expect. It's something you tend to see more on more tooly watches, but I have to say this is probably going to be an absolute strap monster. So yeah, it's pretty useful. So let's discuss this dial, the main attraction without a shadow of a doubt. And it's an absolute capo lavoro. To really understand this texture, we have to dig a little deeper into its inspiration. Kirasuri literally means mica painting, and it's the use of fine mica flakes scattered on print while the ink is wet, which produces a subdued sparkling effect. And these flakes would stick to the print using a special glue consisting of an egg white or a rice paste. And these were applied on special blocks, which was used heavily in ukiyo-e woodblock printing. Ukiyo-e is a genre of Japanese art which flourished predominantly in the 17th century and lasted into the 19th century. Its artists produced woodblock prints and paintings of subjects such as kabuki actors, sumo wrestlers, scenes from history, folk tales, travel scenes, landscapes, a lot of flora, fauna, and erotica as well. Now, we all know Hokusei and his famous Great Wave of Kanagawa that we see on the case back of many Seiko divers, and I myself also have a small collection of Japanese prints from about the turn of the century, 19th century, from the Japanese-Russian conflict. Nature is always the largest inspiration in this artwork, and I myself am a big fan of Hiroshige, one of the most prominent woodblock print artists of Japan. Interestingly, to put it in Western context, a lot of actual artists from the West were inspired, especially the Impressionists. For me, the texture does remind me of, in particular, it's a kind of Van Gogh or even Toulouse-Lautrec. You could even say perhaps there's a little bit of Monet in there. And this Japanese art became quite influential in Western art, especially in the 1860s, inspiring patterned wallpaper, rugs, etc. Even Whistler focused his attention on the ephemeral elements of nature that we see in ukiyo-e landscapes. In fact, Van Gogh himself was an avid collector. Claude Debussy drew inspiration for his music from the prints of Hokusei and Hiroshige in particular. So I think it makes sense in this particular watch, because this is very much trying to appeal to the Western market. So it's a clever amalgamation of artistic influences. The color choice is also quite striking. It's mostly celeste, I would say, and then in certain lights turns more aqua. But there's several blues going on in here. I mean, there's not just one dominant hue of blue, shall we say, and it has a very dynamic effect. So the hands are razor sharp, typical Grand Seiko Dauphine hands, as specified by the rules we talked about in part 1. We have the power reserve in the same position as the previous snowflake we reviewed, with a marvelous guilloche effect. Power reserve is located off-center towards the left, much to the annoyance of some people. I don't mind it. I think it kind of reminds me of some pocket watches, actually. But yeah, I think 12 o'clock would have been more symmetrical, or even symmetrically at 6 for a little bit more balance. I don't mind it. I think it's a nice position there. And there's even a little two applied indices for completely empty and then full. The full one being inside that fluted guilloche section that tapers masterfully down to 0 when it's empty, of course. The hands have incredibly sharp beveling that matches and complements the applied indices for the hours with a double at the 12. Very simple black print markings for the minutes around the periphery of the dial, and then signed Japan Again, very subtly with the designation of the movement. We have the applied Grand Seiko logo in the Gothic font that has become synonymous with the brand since the early days. The Grand Seiko name beneath the logo in black print, again in the Gothic lettering, and wonderful faceted edges on those indices. We have a date window at 3 o'clock with a crisp white date wheel. If we turn to look at the back, we see quite a wide display back with the lion this time etched onto the sapphire case back there. The lion itself is in a kind of silver and then appears black in low light. Personally, I would have preferred without it because it does obscure the view of the movement a little bit. So let's discuss the movement. The movement is the 9R65, which is an automatic spring drive, and of course the spring drive technology, which is often a point of contention by watch enthusiasts, whether it is a quartz or mechanical. In simple terms, it's really a hybrid of sorts. It's still mostly mechanical, and the watch relies on tiny quartz circuit and flywheel that Seiko calls the glide wheel to regulate the timekeeping instead of the traditional mechanical escapement. So Grand Seiko have replaced the escapement with what they call the tri-synchro regulator. The glide wheel is geared up and spins at a high speed, powering a set of electromagnets surrounding it that drives a quartz IC circuit. The circuit then provides back an electromagnetic resistance to the glide wheel for accurately regulating its speed and thus the timekeeping of the watch. With the IC quartz circuit, it is therefore not uncommon to have insane accuracies, even up to they specify plus or minus 1 second a day, although I'm happy and rather astonished to report that it is accurate to about a few seconds a week. So it does use quartz crystals, but not quartz to drive the watch, and this is a very important point. We really do have to make that distinction. So what does that essentially mean? Well, the watch doesn't tick. There's no BPH, there's no frequency. The second hand just glides along continuously, as smooth as butter. Now, in my early review of the snowflake, I criticized it feeling rather cold because, of course, there's no audible tick. There's not even a hum like in the below the Actron movements, and therefore it's been referred to as the quiet revolution. Now, if we unscrew the crown to the first position, we get manual wind. I have to say it is rather grainy feeling. I always expect to feel something incredibly refined when winding a Grand Seiko, but it's actually a little bit of a letdown, but that doesn't really mean anything. But if we pull it out to the first position, you can see we get quick set, and if we pull it out all the way, you'll see the second hand has stopped, so it is hackable. Screwing it back in, it threads marvelously well. I must say, I do love the crown. It's very ergonomic. It's perfectly proportioned, much like everything on this watch. Now, I must point out that the date change is semi-instantaneous near midnight. It will start to change around 30 minutes before midnight, then cleanly snap as it nears 12 p.m. What is really cool is that it also has the magic lever system. We also discussed that in part 1. So it's a 30 joule movement. We have a 72-hour power reserve. Overall, the movement decoration is mostly mechanical applied. However, we do get their version of Côte de Genève, etc. Very wide and deep machined stripings. It is extremely clean and precisely done, and they are applied across the bridges and the rotor. We have the Grand Seiko signed rotor, machine engraved, and it's also filled with paint, again in the Gothic lettering. The screws are a little plain. Fortunately, there's no beveling on them, but there are some wonderful beveled edges elsewhere. And there's also no heated blued screws, which I was a little bit surprised at. However, the beveling on the main bridges are very wide. They are also machine applied, including the countersinks for the jewels. On the bridge, under the rotor, is the very neatly machine-engraved fonts for the caliber designation, and it's also filled with paint. Additionally, the winding gears are visible, and even have a sunburst finish applied to them, which is a very nice touch. And if you look closely to the movement, you can actually see one of the ratchet wheel engaging with the paw of the magic lever. In terms of servicing, it's done in Japan most of the time, with some exceptions. However, the duration is very short, apparently. And in some countries, Grand Seiko has now got distributors and service centers, such as the United States. They can do some of the work themselves. So the big question is, how does this resplendent beauty wear? Well, let's pop this bad boy in the wrist and find out. So for my 6¼ inch wrist, it does wear rather large. It's not a small piece by any means. However, its presence is absolutely gorgeous. The weight is about 72 grams on the strap and about 155 grams on the bracelet. It's not too tall, but has an absolutely bewitching presence. That is undeniable. It's also very legible thanks to the sheer spectacular light effect that the sharp edges achieve. So pleasing to look at. I have to say it is very comfortable, despite personally for me I think it is too large. So I would say definitely for the medium to large wrists. It's a shame that there is not a smaller version for the smaller wrist. So let's summarize the watch. So we'll start with the positives. Well, first of all, I think it's unquestionably elegant. It has a simply ravishing appeal. Anyway, I'm not going to go on and on with all the mellifluous meanderings and praise about its beauty. It's pretty evident. I've never seen a dial like it. The closest thing, I guess, would be a linen dial. But this has even more complexity and is even more dazzling to behold. I also think it's a much needed pop of pizzazz to the Grand Seiko. It needs to be a little bit more playful. No, playful is perhaps not the right word. It needs to have something just to elevate the Grand Seiko out of it being too conservative without abandoning its very strict code of design that we talked about in part 1. Because, and we'll discuss it in the negatives, usually Grand Seiko's styling, and typically of the Japanese style, is always more on the conservative side. At the price, it's about 6,800 retail. I don't think there's anything out there that is as well finished in terms of the polishing at that price range, unequivocally. I mean, just I love the way there's that contrast on the top of the lug. It's also got its own little quirks, which I do appreciate. We also have to commend its technical achievement. This is a serious piece of horology, and I'm using the word horology very deliberately here. We have to keep in mind for centuries watchmakers have dreamed about making a continuous motion to a movement like this, and in many ways it's kind of the pinnacle of what a watch movement should be. That also has a slightly detrimental effect, which we'll discuss in a moment. But its accuracy is deadly, its beauty is bewitching, its quality is outstanding. This is, without a shadow of a doubt, pure, unadulterated class. It has a kind of regal elegance to it that exudes kind of sophistication, and I love that. I actually think this is great value for money. And I know some people are going to disagree with me, but guys, the level of craftsmanship involved, the technology, the quality, pretty hard to beat, especially at this price range. And let's not forget, when we're talking about value, that they've cleverly kept this to an extremely low number. What was it? I think, 558, which is not many at all. That will very much help keep its desirability and its value. That is an extremely limited amount, especially for such a big company. Imagine for a moment that this was developed in Switzerland. I would dread to think how expensive it would be. If you take into consideration the history of part 1, it has its own completely unique story behind it. It has the heritage. It's a very strong watch for the money. So let's discuss the negatives. Well, first of all, the 19mm lug width. pain in the butt. We always say that. I wish it was 20. I think 20 would have suited this style of case. The size, I'll just bring in my wife's Saab 033. This to me I think is the ideal size, and this is such a success. I would love it to be that size. I would probably get a Grand Seiko if it was made in this 38mm size. This is actually now my wife's. It used to be mine. But again, you can see that they're related. You can see the style cues that are integral in the Seiko brand. And actually that leads me on to a negative point. You could argue that the Grand Seiko, at the end of the day, and this is what people say, oh, it's got Seiko on the dial. They would never be prepared to pay that much for a Seiko. Well, I actually like that. I actually like the fact, because it's not about status here. When I'm wearing this, I know of the mastery and the sublime manufacturing that's gone into making this thing. This is more of a status watch of a different kind. This conveys a level of watch enthusiast connoisseurship, if you will, as opposed to trying to display wealth or success. I mean, if I saw somebody wearing a Grand Seiko, it's not, you know, they appreciate watches on a whole other level. It's still a best kept secret. You know, the Grand Seikos have not had that impact on the mainstream, and they're obviously trying to change it with this. Personally, I would love to wear a Grand Seiko, and I'd happily pay for it. But for a lot of people, it's all about the name and about the status. And for that, this is not going to be a good watch for you. But if you care about innovation, if you care about heritage and quality and horology over luxury branding, then this is definitely for you. At first glance, yes, they're really, you know, you don't really notice at first glance, but it's not about that. This is something a little bit more profound than your entry-level Seiko. Other negatives, well, I've got to say I'm not a fan of the bracelet. It reminds me of the bracelet on this. I almost said Seamaster, on the Speedmaster. Now it is, if we get a close up there, the finishing is impeccable, undoubtedly. The transition, well, it's super sharp edges. You got solid end links, screwed in links there. The threefold double push button clasp. However, I just think I would have liked something different. That's all. Maybe that's my personal taste. Also, the genre of the watch. There's no loom here, which suggests dress watch. Spring bar holes, that suggests tool watch. Screw down crown, which to me suggests sport watch. What is this watch? It has a little bit of a, perhaps you could say, an identity crisis, and at the same time you could say no, it's got its own identity. Again, that might be a slightly Marmite effect for some. For me, I see it as more of a dress watch because of that dial and because of the level of refinement that's gone into it. I just wish it wore like one and was a little smidgen smaller. But, again, that's my preference. If you've got the larger wrists, you're absolutely going to love this. Apart from tiny nitpickings in its design, the negatives are virtually non-existent. The only thing I will say, and what I did say in the review of the Snowflake all those years ago, is that it takes a while to get used to the fact that it doesn't tick. You know what? I'll use the analogy a bit like Data in Star Trek, is that all he longs to be is human. The android, it's too perfect, it's too precise, there's a coldness there. Whereas, humans, we are imperfect, and it is our imperfections that make us, that define us, really, if you think about it. And you could say that is part of the charm of traditional mechanical-only wristwatches. Maybe too much of an abstract concept to try and explain it. We sometimes use the metaphor of escapement beating away there, almost like a human heart, giving it an organic quality. And that is certainly something that we find endearing about especially mechanical watches. Almost so close to perfection, it loses some of that soul that makes a mechanical watch. But then again, when you chase perfection, like the Japanese do so often, engineering in this case, you almost go to a kind of godlike level, as opposed to, the the mere mortals of a of a more traditional. Anyway, yeah, I'm getting way too pretentious and philosophical about it. But you know what I'm saying? It just lacks a little bit of that soul. It's almost too perfect, if that makes any sense. However, I've got to say, it is an absolutely cracking piece. I feel quite privileged to have had some time with it. Got to thank Timeless again. Simply magnificent. Would I buy one? Yes, I would, if it was in the smaller size, undoubtedly. I think this would be a really good addition to my personal collection, and also being a massive fan of Seiko, I think at some point I will own a Grand Seiko. I definitely think maybe I might even go vintage, who knows, but I'm definitely charmed by the story of Grand Seiko now. I really do wish them all the best of luck in the future, and I'm quite sad to return this. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and found it useful. And as always, guys, I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.
This is a public service reminder for the good Gentry. Please follow us on Instagram, join the Facebook UGWC group, and click on the bell to keep notified of new videos. Don't forget to keep it positive, keep it Gentry, onwards and upwards. Thank you.